In this video, we're going to learn about the structure and function of the conducting system of the heart. You need to be able to state the location of the sinoatrial node and the atrioventricular node in the heart. You also need to be able to explain the control of the contraction of the heart muscle and explain how the electrical impulses are transmitted. So, the heartbeat originates from within the heart itself. Heart muscle cells are self-contractile. However, we need to make sure that the contracting of the heart muscle cells is coordinated. Otherwise, the cardiac cycle will not function properly. The heart muscle cells will contract and produce an electrochemical signal, which is then passed on to other cardiac muscle cells and so on and so forth in a very set pattern, causing them to contract in a coordinated fashion. Right? The conducting system ensures that your heartbeat always follows this coordinated manner. The autorhythmic cells in the sinoatrial node, SA node or pacemaker are found within the wall of the right atrium. And it's this patch of cells that sets the rate at which the heart contracts. You can see on this diagram the various other conducting tissues of the heart. So we have number 1, the SA node or pacemaker in the right atrium. Number 2 is called the atrioventricular node. And then numbers 3, 4 and 5 we will just refer to as the conducting fibres of the heart. So as I said, the cells in the SA node set the rate for the beating of the heart. They set the rate for the contraction of the cardiac muscle cells. And the timing for this is controlled by impulses from the SA node, which spread across the atria and cause the atria to contract in atrial systole. This electrochemical impulse then travels to the AV node, located between the atria and the ventricles, and then travels down the conducting fibres in the central wall of the heart and then up through the outer walls of the ventricles, causing ventricular systole. Okay. And this allows the heart to contract in its coordinated manner. So we have the SA node that initiates the electrochemical signal. It spreads across the atria, causing atrial systole. The AV node then picks up the impulse and it is conducted through the conducting fibres in the septum, which is down the middle of the heart, and then up through the outer ventricular walls, and that causes the ventricles to contract from the bottom up. And this means that we always get atrial systole, ventricular systole, then diastole. Atrial systole, ventricular systole, diastole in this coordinated manner. Okay. So, diagram just shows how the SA node initiates the impulse and then passes the electrochemical impulse to the AV node, which spreads it down the conducting fibres and up through the outer walls of the ventricles to cause ventricular systole. So this section is going to look at how the heart rate can be regulated or changed to meet the different circumstances that happen within the body. Okay, so we're going to look at how the nervous system via the medulla and the autonomic nervous system can increase or decrease the heart rate. And we'll also discuss the electrical currents in the heart that are detected by an ECG. So, the SA node initiates the heartbeat. It sends out the electrochemical signal to the other heart muscle cells to tell them when to contract. However, this can be altered by nerve impulses and also by hormones. The part of the brain that's responsible for this is the medulla, which regulates the action of the autonomic nervous system that we learned about in Unit 3. Remember, the autonomic nervous system is responsible for the unconscious activities, and it consists of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. So the autonomic nervous system is part of the peripheral nervous system, and it controls your unconscious actions. Sympathetic is responsible for your fight and flight responses that happen during exercise or stress, and parasympathetic responses are your rest and digest that happen when your body is at peace. Your sympathetic nerves release noradrenaline, which increases the heart rate and also increases the strength of the contraction of the cardiac muscle, which means that cardiac output will increase during exercise. This is activated due to stress or fear, and it's a natural response of the body. Your parasympathetic nerves release acetylcholine, which decreases your heart rate and also decreases cardiac output. And we say that the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems work antagonistically to each other, which means they have opposing effects on the same organs. The conducting system of the heart generates currents that can be detected by an electrocardiogram or ECG. And this can be used to measure the electrical changes that take place in the heart. You can see a typical ECG on the diagram here. The P wave, this is this first little bit here on the left, shows the electrical activity of the impulse spreading from the SA node and across the atria. The QRS complex, this big bit here, shows the electrical impulses spreading through the ventricles. And then the T wave shows electrical recovery at the end of ventricular systole when the heart is relaxing and getting ready to start the next cardiac cycle. So on this diagram, the purple shows the electrical activity. So we have purple here in the atria coming from the SA node, spreading across the whole atria, and this is reflected in the P wave. And then there is the down part of the Q wave is when the electrical impulse is spreading down through the septum at the middle. And then as it spreads out through the outer ventricle walls, you've got the R and the S. And then as the ventricles recover, we get the T wave. And then we're back to the start again. So an ECG is generated by placing electrodes on the surface of the body. These pick up the electrical impulses that are produced by the heart, and the tracings can be used to identify problems such as a heart attack or myocardial infarction. So this picture shows where the electrodes would be placed for a standard ECG. There are 12 of them. It's referred to as a 12 lead. Now, you might have heard it if you like to watch medical programmes like Casualty or Grey's Anatomy. Some of the questions that come up in the exam ask you to be able to calculate a heart rate from looking at an ECG. Okay, so in order to do this, you first of all need to be able to work out the length of one cardiac cycle. We then take the 60 seconds in a minute, divide it by the time taken for one cardiac cycle or one heartbeat, and that will give you your heart rate in beats per minute. On this diagram, we can identify the start and the finish of the ECG, right? And that's represented by the two dotted red lines, right? So the start is here at the start of the P wave, and then we find the start of the next one here. Okay, so between these two dotted red lines, that is one complete cardiac cycle. The scale tells us that each box is worth 0.1 seconds. So for this one, we just need to count along. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 boxes. So one cardiac cycle is 0.5 seconds in this example. So 60 divided by 0.5 gives us 120 beats per minute. That is the heart rate. Okay, here's a couple examples for you to try. So go through the process, identify the start of the heartbeat and the finish of the heartbeat, one complete cardiac cycle. Use the scale to work out the value of each box. Work out the length of one complete cardiac cycle, and then do 60 divided by the length of the cardiac cycle to work out the heartbeat. Pause the video and have a go now. Okay, so on example 1, we're going to mark out the time for one cardiac cycle. So our first line we're going to put here, and then our second line goes here. So this is one complete cardiac cycle. Now this scale has got 3 boxes for 0.6 seconds. So that means each box is worth 0.2 of a second. So we've got 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, 0.8, 1. So 1 second is the time for one cardiac cycle. So we do our little formula, 60 divided by 1, and we get the answer 60 beats per minute for this heart rate. Example 2, we do the same. We work out where the cardiac cycle starts and finishes. Starts there, finishes there. This time we've got 3 boxes over 0.45 seconds. 0.45 divided by 3 is 0.15. So each box is worth 0.15. So using our formula, 60 seconds divided by the time for one beat. Right, we have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 times 0.5 is 0.15 is 0.75. So 60 divided by 0.75 gives us 80 beats per minute for that heart rate. Now, you're not required the details of this, but it's quite interesting. ECGs can be used to diagnose all sorts of heart complaints. This one at the top here is atrial fibrillation. You can see, right, these peaks here are the ventricular contractions, but you can see from this that there are lots and lots of atrial contractions for each ventricular contraction. That would be felt as sort of like a palpitation. Okay, that can actually be caused by drinking too much caffeine. This one here is ventricular tachycardia. So the ventricles are beating very, very quickly and they are not coordinated with the atria. And with that one, because the ventricles are contracting very quickly, they wouldn't have time to fill up with blood in between each heart rate. So the person would start to feel very faint. And then this bottom one is ventricular fibrillation, referred to as VF. Again, you might have heard it mentioned on medical dramas. This is completely uncoordinated electrical activity of the heart. At this point, all the cardiac muscle cells are contracting independently of each other, and the heart almost looks like a sort of quivering bag of jelly. Pumping cannot take place, and this will be fatal if not corrected. And that's where you need a defibrillator, which completely stops all of the electrical activity of the heart to hopefully allow the pacemaker, the SA node, to take over.